Hey Planeswalkers, Tyler here, and welcome to another video from Partners With. Today, I'm going to be going through a personal favorite deck tech of mine, Geth, Lord of the Vault. But before I get into that, a quick disclaimer. The deck, as I have it outlined in this video, is the personal version that I play. I'll admit it may not be the most efficient, fit into any given budget, or at the time of recording, hasn't been tuned up with any of the new cards from Tutors Beyond Death, but I'll be looking how to build a more focused and budget-friendly version of the deck later down the road. Leave your suggestions for upgrades in the comments, too. Geth, Lord of the Vault, is a 5/5 zombie that costs 4 black. He comes with Intimidate, meaning he can only be blocked by artifact creatures and creatures that share color with him, and he has Pay X and a black, put target artifact or creature card from an opponent's graveyard with converted mana cost X onto the battlefield under your control tapped. Then that player puts the top X cards of their library into their graveyard. On his front, Geth is a fairly straightforward black commander. He hits hard, he reanimates, and he mills. These are the concepts I built the deck around, in addition to a sacrifice theme and a zombie tribal theme. The plan of the deck is to flood the field, make my opponents sacrifice their best creatures, then raise those creatures from the dead to do my own bidding, or Geth's bidding, as it were. First, let's take a look at our ways of sacrificing creatures, both on our field and on our opponents. Our first batch of sacrifice outlets are Corpse Blockade, Carrion Feeder, Phyrexian Ghoul, and Nantuko Husk. Corpse Blockade is a 1/4 zombie with Defender for 2 and a black. Carrion Feeder is a 1/1 zombie who cannot block for a single black, and both Phyrexian Ghoul and Nantuko Husk are 2/2 zombies for 2 and a black. However, the Backstreet Boys here all have one ability that makes them invaluable to the deck as a whole. They all have a free sacrifice effect. Corpse Blockade lets you sacrifice a creature at instant speed to gain Death Touch until end of turn. Carrion Feeder gets to eat a boy quickly to get +1/+1 counter, and both the Ghoul and the Husk can die upon their teammates to get +2/+2 until end of turn. And if those 4 weren't enough, we also run Altar of Dementia, a 2-mana artifact that lets us sacrifice a creature, then make target player put a number of cards equal to that creature's power from the top of their library into their graveyard. This can help us either mill an opponent's deck for spicy cards to reanimate with Geth, or get some of our own creatures into the yard for later use. Our next batch of sacrifice outlets are a bit more unique than the first, and can offer their own special value in specific situations. First up, we have the Fleshbag Marauder. He's a 3/1 zombie that casts for 2 and a black, and when he enters the battlefield, each player sacrifices a creature. Basically, he's a fun reanimation target that we can use to keep the pressure on by repeatedly taking anywhere from 1 to 3 creatures with him when you inevitably sacrifice him to his own ability. God Eternal Bontu is a 5/6 legendary zombie god with menace that casts for 3 black, and when she enters the battlefield, we can sacrifice any number of other permanents to draw an equal amount of cards. She also has the ability to put herself back into the library if she ever dies or gets exiled. Trader Gator 2 Electric Boogaloo is a massive value engine for this deck, and one who I've debated making the commander over Geth repeatedly. She can come down, gobble up some cards, and refill our hand, and then come back later at the dawn of the 3rd day when we need her the most. Gift of Doom is an aura enchantment that costs 4 and a black, and reads, Enchanted creature has Death Touch and Indestructible. That alone is pretty impressive. However, the reason that we have it here in the deck is because it's a morph card, meaning we can cast it for 3 generic mana as a 2/2 creature. Its morph cost is even simpler. Sacrifice a creature. No mana, no special hoops. Just do what the deck wants to do, and when it flips face up, we can automatically attach it to a creature for a nasty surprise. The last 2 creatures that we're going to look at in this particular category are 2 of our heaviest hitters. Razaketh, the Foul-Blooded, and Shieldred, Whispering One. Razaketh is an 8/8 legendary demon with flying and trample that casts for 5 black. He comes with the ability, pay 2 life, sacrifice another creature. Search your library for a card and put that card into your hand, then shuffle your library. That ability is absolutely insane. In addition to essentially being a free sacrifice outlet, since, paying 2 life really isn't that big of a deal, honestly, we also get a free demonic tutor, all at instant speed. Big Mama Shieldred, on the other hand, is a 6/6 Praetor with Swamp Walk that casts for 5 black. She reads, at the beginning of your upkeep, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. She also comes with, at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, that player sacrifices a creature. Shieldred is a massive threat on everyone's turn, reanimating for you and making your opponents fill up their yards with tasty creatures that Geth can snatch up later. So, with so many ways to butcher our own creatures, we need ways to capitalize on those deaths. That brings us to our next segment, our biggest sacrifice payoffs. Silumgar Scavenger is a 2/3 zombie bird with flying that casts for 4 and a black. It also has Exploit, meaning it has the option of letting us sacrifice a creature when it enters the battlefield. Whenever another creature we control dies, the Scavenger also gets a +1/+1 counter. It gains haste until end of turn if it exploited a creature as well. The Scavenger represents a massive threat in the air, something black zombies tend to have an issue with, as corpses famously cannot fly. It can just sit there, gaining counters as our deck does what we want it to do, and then swoop in for massive damage when it's gorged itself. Undead Augur is a 2/2 zombie wizard who casts for black. He has, whenever Undead Augur or another zombie you control dies, you draw a card and lose a life. The Augur is one of the best sources of repeated card draw, since most of our creatures are zombies and we want them to die. Best of all, he even triggers off of himself, so if an opponent tries to deal with him immediately, we're still going to get at least 1 card to replace him as he goes. And next, we have the Harvester of Souls, a 5/5 demon with Death Touch that casts for 4 black. He reads, whenever another non-token creature dies, you may draw a card. His strengths lie where the Augur is weak. Our biggest sources of sacrifice fodder, as we'll get to later, are zombie tokens, which trigger the Augur on death, but not the Harvester. However, the Harvester can trigger off of our opponent's sacrifices, something the Augur can't do. It's like the world's most disgusting version of Romeo and Juliet. But how do we make our opponents sacrifice regularly? Dictate of Erebos is an enchantment that casts for 3 black. It has Flash and says whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent sacrifices a creature. Dictate is probably our strongest sacrifice payoff, as it combines very well with our collection of sacrifice outlets to give us the most control over the board. Butcher of Malakir is a 5/4 flying vampire warrior that costs 5 black and has the same ability as Dictate. Having both of these cards out at the same time doubles our value, as a single sacrifice from us results in 2 sacrifices from each opponent. Finally, we have Grave Betrayal. It's an enchantment that casts for 5 black and reads, whenever a creature you don't control dies, return it to the battlefield under your control with an additional +1/+1 counter at the beginning of the next end step. That creature is a black zombie in addition to its other colors and types. Grave Betrayal is absolutely mad in this deck. By making our opponents kill off their best creatures, we get to reap the rewards by making use of all that beef at the end steps, giving us a more commanding board presence, turning them into zombies that the Augur and the Harvester can draw cards from, and allowing us to continue to have plenty of not-so-fresh meat to feed the corpse grinder. Now, we've talked a lot about sacrificing, but not much on what we're going to use to fuel those engines with. In this segment, we'll look at our zombie token makers. Army of the Damned is one of, if not my #1, favorite Hail Marys in this entire deck. It's a sorcery that casts for 5 black and reads, put 13 2/2 black zombie creature tokens onto the battlefield tap. It also has flashback for a whopping 7 black. 26 creatures from this one clown car of a card. Each one a zombie that represents so much value just by dying. Next, Stir the Sands is another sorcery, casting only for 4 black and saying, create 3 2/2 black zombie creature tokens. It also has cycling for 3 and a black, allowing us to discard it to draw a card. But when it's cycled, we get to create 1 2/2 zombie token. Stir the Sands can give us value at any point in the game, netting us a card and a zombie early game if we don't need it, or 3 zombies later if we do. No matter what, it feeds the Horde. We've also got Endless Ranks of the Dead, an enchantment that costs 2 black and says, at the beginning of your upkeep, put X 2/2 black zombie creature tokens onto the battlefield, where X is half the number of zombies you control rounded down. All we need is to keep 2 zombies around by the time this triggers to start slowly accruing value from this enchantment. 2 turns into 3, which turns into 4, which turns into 6, then 9, then 13, all from this one enchantment. Keeping the token train shambling, we have Overseer of the Damned, Ghoulcaller Gisa, and Josu Ves, Lich Knight. Overseer is a 5/5 flying demon that casts for 5 black and has, when Overseer of the Damned enters the battlefield, you may destroy target creature, and also, whenever a non-token creature an opponent controls dies, create a tapped 2/2 black zombie creature token. The Overseer is a monster that will generally come down with at least 1 body in tow and rid the board of the biggest threat. He'll then continue to spit out zombies as our opponents are forced again and again to sacrifice their creatures. Ghoulcaller Gisa is a 3/4 legendary human wizard that casts for 3 black and has black, tap, sacrifice another creature, put X 2/2 black zombie creature tokens onto the battlefield where X is the sacrificed creature's power. While most of our zombies are 2/2s, Gisa will generally, at worst, still be able to take 1 zombie and make it into 2. However, we do have a rather sizable amount of beefy boys with 5, 6, 7 power, meaning that Gisa can churn out even more undead if they are threatened. Finally, we have Josu Ves, Lich Knight, a 4/5 legendary zombie knight for 2 black with menace and kicker for 5 and a black. If he enters the battlefield and was kicked, he enters with 8 2/2 black zombie knight creature tokens, meaning that only for a small payment of 10 mana, we get 20 power on the board divided over 9 bodies, or you can get a single 4/5 for 4 if it's early in the game. Not a bad rate in my book. Speaking of one of those beefy boys I mentioned earlier, we have Grave Titan, a 6/6 giant for 4 black with Death Touch for some reason, and the ability to make 2 2/2 zombies whenever he enters the battlefield or attacks. Part of the mythic cycle of Titans from M15, Big Thickums over here is literally bursting with bodies to spew onto the battlefield. He also has a fantastic reanimation target, since he comes with 2 free bodies literally just by showing up. Next, the Diregraph Colossus, a 2/2 zombie giant that casts for 2 and a black, and who enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for every zombie in our graveyard. He also spits out zombie tokens each time we cast a zombie spell, almost turning every single one of our zombies into a kind of mini Grave Titan. Almost. One of those zombie spells is Crypt Breaker, a 1/1 zombie that casts for a single black and comes with 2 abilities. His first is 1 and a black, tap, discard a card, put a 2/2 black zombie creature token onto the battlefield. And his second is tap 3 untapped zombies you control, draw a card, and lose a life. Crypt Breaker is a different way to make use of those zombie tokens that we're making, being able to turn them into instant speed card draw at the cost of a single life and tapping down 3 of our corpses. With Diregraph Colossus out, just casting Crypt Breaker will give you immediately everything that you need to draw a card. And finally, the last 2 cards in this segment are Liliana Heretical Healer and Liliana's Mastery. Liliana is a 2/3 legendary human cleric with lifelink that casts for 1 black and has, whenever another non-token creature you control dies, exile Liliana, then return her to the battlefield transformed under her owner's control. If you do, put a 2/2 black zombie creature token onto the battlefield. She re-enters as our first Planeswalker, Liliana Defiant Necromancer. She's a 3 loyalty walker with +2, each player discards a card, -X, return target non-legendary creature card from your graveyard with CMC X to the battlefield, and -8. You get an emblem with whenever a creature dies, return it to the battlefield under your control at the beginning of the next end step. While I wouldn't get our hopes high on casting her ultimate, as she is a major threat the moment she hits the board, getting to cast it will most likely end the game quickly. All of our sacrificed non-token creatures come back for another round, all of our opponent's creatures become ours, and we dominate the board with an army of rotting flesh and gnashing teeth. Her other abilities, however, are nothing to scoff at either. Getting to force everybody to lose a card to the yard, which is almost like us getting to add cards to our hand, is incredibly powerful, and her recursion ability can help us nab back whatever creatures we lose. Liliana's Mastery, on the other hand, is a 3/black enchantment that gives all of our zombies +1/+1 and creates 2/2/2 zombies on entering the battlefield. An anthem effect for our zombies is incredibly deadly, especially if we end up going wide with our tokens, and the fact that the enchantment brings a couple of bodies with it on entry is just icing on the cake. So we've covered how to sacrifice, what happens when we sacrifice, and what it is that we'll mostly be sacrificing. However, sometimes we won't have zombie tokens, and we'll have to toss our regular zombies into the bin. Not a massive problem, but how do we get them back when they're needed again? Blood for Bones is a sorcery for 3 and a black that also makes us sacrifice a creature as an additional cost. We then get to return a creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield, then return a second creature from our grave to our hand. Ever After is another sorcery for 4/black that lets us return up to 2 target creatures from our yard to the battlefield. It makes them black zombies in addition to their other colors and types. Then Ever After puts itself at the bottom of our deck. Victimize is yet another sorcery for 2 and a black that lets us choose 2 target creatures in our graveyard and return them to the battlefield tapped after sacrificing a creature we control. Finally, Beacon of Unrest is another sorcery for 3/black that lets us steal an artifact or creature from anyone's graveyard and then shuffles itself back into the deck for later use. We also run Entreat the Dead, Dread Return, Gravedigger, and Boneyard Parlay. Entreat is a sorcery for XX black that lets us return X creature cards from our graveyard to the battlefield. But it also has a miracle cost of X black, allowing us to do the same effect for a massive discount, if it's the first card that we've drawn that turn. Dread Return is a sorcery, lots of sorceries here, the dead aren't known for traditionally moving quickly, that casts for 2 black and lets us return a creature from our graveyard to the battlefield. But we can also flash the spell back by sacrificing 3 creatures, playing back into our theme of grinding our own creatures for value. Gravedigger is a 2/2 zombie for 3 and a black that gets us a creature card from our graveyard back into our hand when he enters the battlefield. Boneyard Parlay is probably our most interesting method of recursion though. For 5 black, we get a sorcery that lets us exile up to 5 target creature cards from all graveyards. An opponent separates the chosen cards into 2 piles, and we get to pick one pile to return to the battlefield while the other pile gets divided back into its respective graveyards. This card is one of the most versatile spells, as it can also work as a political tool. We can strike a deal with an opponent to help get more of the cards that we want. Our last batch of recursion spells include the Eldest Reborn, Hell's Caretaker, Animate Dead, and Dawn of the Dead. The Eldest Reborn is a 4 and a black saga enchantment, meaning it enters the battlefield with a lore counter, then gains another lore counter after each of our draw steps. Then we sacrifice it after it has 3 or more lore counters. When the first counter is placed on it, each opponent sacrifices a creature. Then the second is placed, and each opponent discards a card. And when the final counter is placed, we get to pick a creature or planeswalker from any graveyard and put it onto the battlefield under our control. Hell's Caretaker is another weird card. It's a 1/1 horror that casts for 3 and a black and has tap, sacrifice a creature, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Activate this ability only during your upkeep. So basically, the Caretaker lets us trade our 2/2 zombie tokens for something much better at the cost of only being able to use the ability in our upkeep. Having to tap it down doesn't really matter, since we won't really be attacking or blocking with a non-evasive 1/1 anyways. But next, we have yet another strange card with Animate Dead. While it may seem a little convoluted on the surface though, it's actually a relatively simple card. It's an aura enchantment that casts for 1 and a black and can only enchant a creature that's already in someone's graveyard. When Animate Dead enters the battlefield, we take that targeted creature and put it onto the battlefield with Animate Dead attached to it. Animate Dead loses the enchant creature in a graveyard and instantly gains enchant creature card put onto the battlefield with Animate Dead. You then gain control of that creature, though if it dies, Animate Dead goes to your graveyard, and if Animate Dead leaves the battlefield, the enchanted creature returns to the graveyard it came from. The enchanted creature also gets -1/-0. Our final card in this category is Dawn of the Dead. It's an enchantment for 2 black, and reads, at the beginning of your upkeep, lose 1 life. At the beginning of your upkeep, also return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste until end of turn. Exile that creature at the end of turn. While the exile clause might seem counterproductive to our strategy of playing with our graveyard, if we have one of our many sacrifice outlets on the battlefield, we can sacrifice the creatures before Dawn of the Dead can exile them, meaning we essentially have a near-free recursion spell every single turn for just a single life. Our next category is relatively small, and looks at the tutors that we're running in this deck. At the moment, the deck only has 4 primary cards dedicated to tutoring up whatever we need, with the only other one being stapled to Razaketh from earlier. But speaking of Razaketh, our first tutor is Razaketh's Right, a sorcery for 3 black that lets us search our library for any card and put it into our hand. It also has cycling for a single black in case we need a card right away, but don't have the 5 mana to search for what we really want. Next is Diabolic Tutor, a sorcery for 2 black that lets us search for any card in our deck and add it to our hand. Sidisi, Undead Vizier, is a 4/6 legendary zombie naga for 3 black with Death Touch and Exploit, meaning that we can sacrifice a creature when she enters the battlefield. If she exploits a creature, we can search for any card in our deck and add it to our hand. Sidisi is a powerful reanimation target, as being able to constantly exploit with her lets us turn any of our 2/2 zombies into literally whatever we want. Finally, we have Bitter Revelation, a sorcery that costs 3 and a black and lets us look at the top 4 cards of our deck. We get to put 2 of them into our grave and 2 into our hand, and then we lose 2 life. While yes, it is technically not a tutor spell, the ability to dumpster 2 cards from our top 4 is basically letting us tutor them up later when we have the right reanimation spell. Look, I know it's a stretch, but let me have this. Our next batch of cards focuses more on the fact that we're a zombie deck more than it really does with our primary sacrifice theme. But each of the following zombies has a powerful use that it can bring to the table. Rotting Regisaur is a 7/6 zombie dinosaur for only 2 and a black. It comes with the downside of needing to discard a card during each of our upkeeps, but in a deck where our graveyard is basically an extension of our hand, it really isn't a downside. Plus, it's an amazing sacrifice target for Gisa or the Altar of Dementia. Next, Death Baron, a 2/2 zombie wizard for 1 black that gives all of our skeletons and other zombies Death Touch and +1/+1. The blanket Death Touch anthem, as well as the power toughness boosts old Bone Daddy here gives to our horde of 2/2 vanilla zombies, makes them an actual threat to be reckoned with. Partnered with Lord of the Accursed, a 2/3 zombie for 2 and a black that also gives other zombies +1/+1 and has the ability 2 and a black, tap, all zombies gain menace until end of turn, can swing a game in our favor out of almost nowhere. Finally, the absolute all-star of this deck, Gravecrawler, a 2/1 zombie for a single black that can't block, but is also able to be cast from the grave so long as we control another zombie. I cannot sing this little guy's praises highly enough. He is arguably the greatest source of sacrifice fodder this deck can produce, and can keep coming back for more. Next in line for the MVP of this deck is the Grey Merchant of Asphodel, a 2/4 zombie for 3 black that has, when the Grey Merchant enters the battlefield, each opponent loses X life, X being your devotion to black. You then gain life equal to the total life lost this way. Gary is capable of ending games on his own in just a few turns. In a mono-black deck like this, it isn't uncommon for him to drain anywhere from 5 to 10 life from each opponent, giving you anywhere from 15 to 30 plus life on ETB, depending on the amount of opponents. Combine him with a sacrifice outlet and Dawn of the Dead, and your opponent's days are numbered. Next, we have Relentless Dead, It's a 2/2 zombie for black with menace that has both when Relentless Dead dies, you may pay a black. If you do, return it to its owner's hand. And when Relentless Dead dies, you may pay X. If you do, return another target zombie with CMC X from your graveyard to the battlefield. An efficient creature that's hard to deal with, and you usually can leave behind some kind of body when it dies, Relentless Dead lives up to its name. Finally, Noxious Ghoul, a 3/3 zombie for 3 black that has, when Noxious Ghoul or another zombie enters the battlefield, all non-zombies get -1/-1 until end of turn. This stinky boy is one of our best ways of clearing the battlefield while leaving a majority of our creatures untouched. Since he's giving -1/-1, he also gets around indestructible. Suck it, gods! Next, we have another small category, targeted and mass removal. Sometimes, things just won't die when we want them to, so we need to give them a little push. Murderous Rider is a 2/3 zombie knight for 1 black with lifelink who puts himself at the bottom of our library when he dies. However, he also has an instant stapled to him in the form of an adventure called Swift End. Swift End casts for 1 black and lets us destroy target creature or planeswalker, then we lose 2 life. If we cast the Rider as his adventure, we exile him. We can then cast him later for his regular casting cost. Being both a zombie and a no strings removal spell makes him incredibly deadly under most circumstances. Next, we have Avatar of Woe, a 6/5 avatar that costs 6 black. However, if there are 10 or more creature cards in all graveyards combined, and with this deck there absolutely will be, he casts for 6 less. He also has tap, destroy target creature, it can't be regenerated. He's a repeatable removal spell that will usually only cost us black to play and who is difficult to kill. Next up, Finale of Eternity is a sorcery that costs X black. It lets us destroy up to 3 target creatures with toughness X or less. Then, if X was 10 or more, we get to revive all creature cards in our graveyard. Multi-spot removal combined with the possibility of mass recursion. Enough said. Finally, we have Life's Finale, a sorcery for 4 black that lets us destroy all creatures, then search target opponent's library for up to 3 creature cards and put them in his or her graveyard. Then, that player shuffles their library. Sometimes, everything just needs to die, and this is the perfect reset button. Plus, it lets us go searching an opponent's deck for some juicy reanimation targets that we can bring back later. The next 4 cards are mostly just here because A, this is a mono black deck, and B, we have an alternate win con in case our zombies just can't get there. Phyrexian Arena is an enchantment for 1 black that lets us draw a card on our upkeep for the low cost of a single life. Necropotence is an enchantment for black that lets us skip our draw phase. We also have to exile any card that we would discard. However, we get to pay a life and exile a card from the top of our library, which we would then add to our hand at the beginning of our discard phase. Both the Arena and Necropotence are here just to keep our hands full. Nothing really more. The other 2 cards, Sanguine Bond and Exquisite Blood, are the alternate win con. Sanguine Bond is an enchantment for 3 black that makes our opponents lose life every time we gain life, and Exquisite Blood says we gain life whenever an opponent loses life. Have these 2 out, cause any change in life totals, trigger 1, which will trigger the other, and you have an infinite loop until we win. I almost feel dirty after talking about those. But anyways, next we'll fire through some of the Planeswalkers that this deck runs. Liliana, Dreadhorde General, is a 6 loyalty walker that casts for 4 black, and she has the static ability that says whenever a creature we control dies, we get to draw a card. Her abilities are +1, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token, -4, each player sacrifices 2 creatures, and -9, each opponent chooses a permanent they control of each permanent type and sacrifices the rest. Lily is a threat the moment she drops, creating tokens for us, forcing sacrifice like we want, and if we can get to her ultimate, more or less ending the game on the spot. Her other form, Liliana Vess, is a 5 loyalty walker for 3 black, whose abilities are +1, target player discards a card, -2, search your library for a card, shuffle your library and put that card on top of it, and -8, put all creature cards from all graveyards on the battlefield under your control. As opposed to her previous form, who takes a more commanding presence on the battlefield, Liliana 2 Revengeance focuses more on each player's hand, robbing opponents of resources while helping you find yours with her Vampiric Tutor effect. Last on our list of walkers is Sorin Markov, a 4 loyalty walker for 3 black. His abilities are +2, Sorin deals 2 damage to target creature and you gain 2 life, -3, target opponent's life total becomes 10, and -7, you control target player during their next turn. While it's nice that he's got a Mindslaver effect and the fact that he's Sorin's Thirst on a stick, neither of these really matter because his -4 is the only reason we really have him here. Dropping an opponent to 10 will make it even easier for our zombie horde to finally snuff them out. And now we're on to the last category before discussing the mana base: artifacts. The deck runs a little light, only having 4, but they all serve a purpose. Bontu's Monument is a 3 mana legendary artifact that makes our black creature spells cost 1 cheaper to cast, and drains each opponent for 1 life while gaining us 1 life every time we cast a creature spell. What's better than a 7/6 zombie dinosaur that casts for 3? A 7/6 zombie dinosaur that casts for 2 and drains everybody. Sol Ring needs no introduction. A mana rock that costs 1 and taps for 2. What more could you want? Lightning Greaves is a 2 mana artifact equipment that equips for 0 and gives the equipped creature haste and shroud, meaning it can attack right away and it cannot be the target of any spells or abilities. These sparkly shoes are the best bet at protecting Geth or keeping any of our important utility creatures safe. Finally, Grimoire of the Dead is a 4 mana legendary artifact that has 1. Tap, discard a card, put a study counter on the Grimoire, and tap, remove 3 study counters from the Grimoire and sacrifice it, put all creatures from all graveyards onto the battlefield under your control. They are black zombies in addition to their normal colors and types. A mass resurrection that comes at the cost of our opponent seeing it coming is still pretty powerful. Even if you never get to fire it off, you can still easily get at least 1 or 2 fatties into the grave to reanimate later. Alright, we're in the endgame now. It's time to look at our mana base. The cool part of running a monocolored deck is that our mana base is fairly straightforward. We run 15 swamps as our basics. But we also run a handful of utility lands, mostly to help with this. Field of the Dead is a land that enters tapped and taps for a colorless. However, when it or any other land enters the battlefield under our control, if we control 7 or more lands with different names, we get to make a 2/2 black zombie creature token. But what lands do we have with different names? So far, Swamp and Field make 2, so let's quickly run through the others. Blighted Fen taps for a colorless, or we can pay 4 and a black, tap, and sacrifice it to make target players sacrifice a creature. Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse are exactly the same, letting us tap and sacrifice them to go search for a basic. With a little setup, each of these can even trigger Field of the Dead twice. Haunted Fengraf taps for a colorless, or we can pay 3, tap, and sacrifice it to return a random creature from our graveyard to our hand. Memorial to Folly enters tapped, can tap for a black, or you can pay 2 and a black, tap, and sacrifice it to return target creature card from your grave to your hand. Castle Lochthwain enters tapped unless we control a swamp, taps for a black, and has 1 black, tap, draw a card, then lose life equal to the number of cards in our hand. Gyre Reach Sanitarium is a legendary land that taps for a colorless, or we can pay 2 and tap it to make each player draw a card, then discard a card. Sanctum of Eternity taps for a colorless, or we can pay 2 and tap it to return target commander we own from the battlefield to our hand, but we can only do it during our turn. Reliquary Tower taps for a colorless and removes our hand size limit. Bajuka Bog enters tapped and exiles an opponent's entire graveyard when it enters, and then can tap for a black. Baron Moor enters tapped and taps for black, but we can also cycle it away for a black if we need. And finally, Cradle of the Accursed is a desert that taps for colorless, or we can pay 3, tap, and sacrifice it to make a 2/2 zombie token, but only at sorcery speed. Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth, is a legendary land that turns every land on the battlefield into a swamp in addition to its normal types, helping it mitigate how many colorless lands we have. Mortuary Mire enters tapped, taps for a black, and lets us put a creature card from our graveyard on top of our library when it enters the battlefield. Witch's Cottage taps for a black, enters the battlefield tapped unless we control at least 3 other swamps, and if it enters untapped, we get to put a creature card from our graveyard on top of our library. And finally, we have Westvale Abbey, which taps for a colorless, or we can pay 5, tap it, and pay a life to create a 1/1 black and white human cleric creature token. However, we can also pay 5, tap it, and sacrifice 5 creatures to transform it. And it transforms into Ormondal, Profane Prince, a legendary 9/7 demon with flying, lifelink, indestructible, and haste. Dockmore Salvage enters tapped, taps for a black, and has Dredge 2, meaning if it somehow ends up in our graveyard, we can forego drawing a card and instead mill the top 2 cards of our library and then add Dockmore Salvage back to our hand. Our final land is Phyrexian Tower. It taps for a colorless, or we can tap it and sacrifice a creature to add black to our mana pool. And there we have it, my personal deck for Geth, Lord of the Vault. As I said at the top of the video, it isn't the most budget friendly or probably even the most efficient way to build Geth, but it's a powerful deck and it's loads of fun to play. Leave suggestions in the comments for what you would add for upgrades, and who knows, they might even make it into my actual deck. Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit the subscribe button to hear more from us in the future, hit that little notification bell so you never miss an upload, check us out on social media, and maybe give some of our other videos a watch. I've been Tyler, and this has been a Partners with Commander's Deck Tech. Later!